When big health insurance companies, instead of competing in the marketplace, team up with congressional healthcare writers to order every individual to buy their products, that's crony capitalism. When thousands of small businesses have to meet their bottom lines with no government bailout, well, you're too small to succeed, so good luck. The Democratic leaders of Congress and in the White House hold a view that they call progressivism. They don't like the word liberal anymore. It has politically become unattractive. Well, progressivism began in Wisconsin, where I come from. Know a thing or two about it. Was raised among it. It came into our schools from the European universities under the spell of intellectuals such as Hegel and Weber and their ruler at the time, the German leader Bismarck. The best-known Wisconsin progressive was a person who was a Republican, Robert La Follette. Progressivism was a powerful strain in both political parties for many years. Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican, Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, both brought the progressive movement to Washington. Early progressives wanted to empower and engage the people. They actually fought for populist reforms, like initiative and referendum, recalls, judicial elections, the breakup of monopoly companies, and the elimination of vote buying and urban patronage. But progressivism turned away from popular control and toward central government planning. It lost most Americans and consumed itself in what I would call paternalism, arrogance, and snobbish condescension. Fighting Bob La Follette, Teddy Roosevelt, and even Woodrow Wilson would have scorned the self-proclaimed progressives of our day for handing out bailout checks to giant corporations, for corrupting the Congress to purchase votes for government-controlled health care, and for funneling billions of job stimulus money to local politicians to pay for make-work patronage. That's not progressivism. That's actually what the original progressives in Wisconsin fought against. Since America began, the timid have feared the Founding Fathers' ideas of individual freedom. And so many people then, as do now, yearn for old world class models. Our progressivists are the latest iteration of that same fear of the people. In unprecedented numbers, Americans are speaking out against the intolerable health care bill and the irresponsible debt-ridden spending that's taking place today. Does anyone remember that Norman Rockwell's great painting called Freedom of Speech, showing an average worker, an average Joe, standing there and speaking his mind at a town hall meeting? We used to celebrate that. Today's progressives ridicule average Americans speaking out at tea parties as being un-American. Millions of Americans reject their big government solution, and you know what? This scares them. Last January, President Obama probably said it very clearly, very succinctly, and very correctly. And let me quote, "There are simply philosophical differences that will always come to part ways. These disagreements about the role of government in our lives, about our national priorities and our national security have been taking place for 200 years. He was right. So let's examine these philosophical differences of our government today. Progressivists say that there are no enduring ideas of right or wrong. Everything is relative to history. So our ideas need to change. Progressivists say that the Founders' Constitution, including its amendments with its principles of equal natural rights, limited government, and popular consent, it's outdated. We should have a living constitution that keeps up with the times. Progressivists invent new rights and enforce them with a more powerful central government and federal agencies to direct society through the changes of history." That's the whole idea of the new version of progressivism. And don't worry, they say, bureaucrats can be controlled through congressional oversight. Well, you want to see a good success story of congressional oversight? You ever heard of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? These mortgage giants came to Congress year after year, raising red flags with their regulators, and what happened? They were given more power. They were looked the other way. The guy who's in charge of their committee to oversee them is a guy named Barney Frank. You ever heard of Barney Frank before? Well, let me just say what Barney said right before they imploded. "This ability to provide stability to the market is what, in my mind, makes these Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac a congressional success story." Less than a year later, the market-stabilizing GSEs went belly up due to their shoddy business practices, collapsing the mortgage credit industry and sparking a worldwide financial meltdown. No one knows the ultimate cost to the taxpayers, but it's going to be gigantic. Let me ask you this. If Congress can't control what a few mortgage bureaucrats do with your dollars, Why should anyone trust Congress to control what tens of thousands of bureaucrats do with your health? The ideology embraced by today's leaders is very different from everything rank-and-file Democrats, independents, and Republicans stand for. America stands for nothing if not for the fixed truth that unalienable rights were granted to every human being not by government, but by nature and nature's God. These truths of our founding can't be obsolete because they're not time-bound, they're eternal. The practical consequences of these truths is free market democracy, the American idea of free labor and free enterprise under government by popular consent. The deepest case for free market democracy is a moral case, rooted in human equality and the natural right to be free. A government that expands beyond its high but limited mission of securing our natural rights is not progressive, it's regressive. It privileges the powerful at the expense of the people. It establishes the rule of class over class. The American Revolution and the Constitution replaced class rule with a better idea, equal opportunity for all. The promise of keeping the earnings of your work is central to justice, freedom, and the hope to improve one's life. In our hearts, the American people know this, but people were alarmed in 2008. We had rising unemployment, we had falling home values, a credit crunch, and a financial meltdown. They voted to change parties in the White House, and they elected the largest Democratic majority in more than 3 decades. So overwhelming was their majority that opposition was unable to stop anything from having the majority run roughshod over our foundations. Harry Reid had a supermajority in the Senate that could not be filibustered. Still, the people's mandate for Congress and the new president was very clear, very simple, very unmistakable. Get employment back on track. Get our economy growing again. Get jobs growing again. Americans have lost nearly jobs every month since the federal government was switched parties in January of 2009. Last count, 4 million jobs have been lost. The official unemployment rate hovers around 10%. But when you take a look at actually people who have stopped looking for work because jobs are not available and prospects are low, the rate is a lot higher. They began passing the first stimulus, a taxpayer giveaway to their favorite special interests. That price tag was $862 billion. They pushed through a second stimulus that cost you another $18 billion. Let's see. 4 million jobs have been lost since they passed these stimuli. That averages about 220,000 per job. Just think about that. The people running Congress right now can't even put people out of work without spending nearly $1 trillion. Just to return to where we were at 2007, we need to create 8.4 million new jobs. If we want to get to our pre-crisis level of unemployment rate at 5%, we have to create 247,000 jobs every month by the time the President Obama's first term expires. But there's one area where we're heading in an up direction, not a down direction, and that is this. Government is going at breakneck pace in expanding federal payrolls. Although millions of private sector jobs have been lost since the recession began, Washington is now on track to add 275,000 more people to the public payrolls, a whopping 15% increase in 1 year. We're not talking minimum wages here. More federal workers make over $100,000 than those who make $40,000 or less. The average government worker's salary in 2009 was 21% higher than private sector salaries. The average federal worker's compensation package, including benefits, was nearly $120,000 in 2008, twice the private sector average at $60,000. One study shows that private sector benefit packages average about $9,900, while the federal package averages almost $41,000. Now, the administration wants Congress to privilege federal workers by writing off their unpaid student loans after 10 years. They just confiscated the entire student loan industry, but people in productive private sector jobs would keep paying off their loans for 20 years. Progressivists really would like everybody to work for the federal government, I guess. Has any Congress in history enacted or tried to enact so many foolish, squalid, and counterproductive programs?